Welcome back to the Not Your Mama podcast. This is your host, Kelly Bryant, creator and founder of Kelly Bryant Wellness. And I am joined today by Holly Cooper. Holly,
Hello.
can you start by telling us first your pronouns and what emoji you identify as?
I am she and her and hers. And the emoji that I identify with is usually either this person
The
with
question
the
mark.
hand
Oh,
on
yep.
the side and the shoulder shrug, or the face palm
Mm-hmm.
person.
You have the same problem I have with the shrill, all the versions of the girl who has like the different expressions. What color hair do you choose? Do
Yeah,
you do you
no.
do blonde or do you do black hair?
So it depends on what I just use whatever pops up first. So I go back
Hmm.
and forth. I don't
Oh, oh, okay. That's like very shocking to me. I've just committed and said that I'm the blonde girl. I'm like, it is what
I
it is.
there's if I have to look for the emoji, I tend to lose interest in like expressing myself in emojis and then like just
Fair,
say the words of whatever it is that I was trying
fair,
to
fair. Insert shoulder shrug emoji is what you say.
do.
All right, so I like to have guests introduce themselves so that you have the opportunity to kind of let us know what it is that you want people to know about like the wholeness of your person. So you can include your relationship status, your job, your kid, whatever you want to include. Who are you, Holly?
I am a mom of a 1-year-old daughter. I am the wife of a priest, which is Episcopalian, not Catholic, so don't get concerned. I am an attorney for the city. I
Or the
am
city. The
the
just
like
we're
the
just
pre
gonna call it the city.
yeah, the city of the New York metropolitan area that might not know which city that is.
Yes.
I also have been quarantined since the baby was born at the end of December because of flu season, going straight into a pandemic. And I guess that's a pretty good start.
Yeah, and so also I will throw out also in the midst of this whole pandemic having a baby, you also moved.
Oh yeah, I moved about a 2-hour move from one end of Long Island to the end of Long Island, closer to the city, um, for the purpose of being, well, my husband's parish got changed and we wanted to be closer to my job, but it turns out that we're working remote until whoever knows when.
Forever.
So
Forever. You're never ever
yeah,
gonna go back into reality again. No, you will.
it doesn't feel like it. I feel like this is the new world. My husband and I were just talking about this morning, that this is the new, he lives in a world in which this is temporary and I live in a world in which this is the new reality. And like the differences in how we view the world now.
I mean, it's interesting because at the beginning of this is so off track of where we're going today, but at the beginning of this pandemic, I like kept saying to people, don't wish this time away. Like, don't start like counting down the days until when it's going to be over because like it's not going to be over that soon. And if it ends up being 2 years, that's like a hefty percentage of your whole life that you're spending just being like, when is this going to end? Like,
Yeah.
we have to like we have to at least in our choices that we make, we have to just like assume that this is how it's going to be because there you can't put off your life until this is over. And of course, we can just be
Yeah, and
like
that was
pleasantly delighted when things go back to normal sooner than that.
so I had told him that I am finding ways to be happy now with this new normal and that
Mhm.
this is like the new way that it just is, and so we have to live our lives and be happy, and we
Mhm.
can't keep going to this place of like, well, in a year from now when I can take her
Mhm.
to the zoo, it's like, no, let's pretend like the zoo is not going to make it because they haven't had any income in
Mhm.
2 years.
Right.
This is, we all live in our houses, in our bubbles, in our quarantine. And then like if things still exist at the end of this, that'll be great. But the restaurants here are closed. Like
Yeah.
who knows if going out to eat will be a thing.
Right. Right. This is like very dystopic. Like just I'm picturing like empty zoos, right? And like jaguars just running loose in New York City because like all of the zoos have ended. S- I mean, maybe it's a utopia. I don't know. It's hard to say on this end of it.
I haven't left my house in months except for doctor's appointments for Caitlin. Like our groceries are delivered. For all I know, that's what New York City looks like now. I don't know. I
Yeah,
haven't seen
right.
it.
Oh my god. All right, so let's rewind the clock back to the before times and tell us a little bit about the process of how did we get to your daughter? So you I think you've told me that you were considered to be like a were you considered to be a geriatric pregnancy? Like you were
Oh yeah.
high risk,
Yeah.
old,
Both times.
quotation
Yeah.
marks. Okay, so tell us about
Right.
your first pregnancy and whatever you want to share about that.
Okay. So I got pregnant in 2018. He would have been born in 2019. We're in 21, I think. So there was a very short period of time in between. So I think it was 2018. We got pregnant. We're very excited, but also like, oh my God, what have we done? We haven't really even like really talked about how this is going to go. And now here we are. I didn't tell anybody until I was about 16 weeks pregnant because it just felt kind of weird. Like it just was weird. Like, I don't know how to explain it except that it was like not the right time to tell people.
Mm.
And then
And
when I
that
was
was just
16
like a
weeks pregnant,
feeling.
it was like, okay, yeah, just like we wanted to tell people at 12 weeks initially, like when you hit that mark where everything's supposed to be okay. Um, and then we hit the 12-week mark and I talked to my husband about like, are we going to tell people? Are we not going to tell people? And he's like, it just doesn't seem like the right time to, it just feels weird. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. It does feel weird. I'm going to tell my boss because I'm starting to have doctor's appointments and things and
Mm.
I need to be out for. And so I told my boss, but I didn't tell anybody else. And then we hit the 16-week mark or right at the six, like right before it. And it was like, I'm starting to show, like I'm showing, like we need to tell people that I'm pregnant, like, or like it's just getting weird now. So we're gonna tell people. So that Saturday at 16 weeks, we told the congregation that did Saturday night worship. And I told my job that Friday, I told everybody, I announced at work that Friday. And so Saturday night leading into Sunday, I woke up in the middle of the night having contractions and woke my husband up and I'm like, we need to go to the hospital. Like I'm having contractions. It's weird. I don't know what's going on. And he was like, okay. He was wait a minute to wake up so I can drive. Like I'm gonna get dressed. I'm gonna go to the bathroom, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna wait downstairs. Like it's getting bad, and they're getting closer together. So by the time my husband got downstairs, like 5 minutes later, like my water broke. Um, we rushed to the nearest hospital, which was not the hospital I was planning to deliver at, but I thought that's because my doctor was associated with the other hospital. But it turns out that the hospital that was close to me did not have OBGYN at all.
Oh.
So I drove to an emergency room with no OBGYN and they were just like, nah. Like, so they were trying to get it so I could be transferred to the other hospital and I ended up delivering the baby in between time. And we lost him at 16 weeks.
Which
So,
is
and that was
and I mean, incredibly rare, right? And so
right. I didn't
how
even know it was possible. Like I thought once you hit 12 weeks, I thought you were like good.
right.
Like
Right,
it
which is
wasn't
one of
even on my
those
radar.
myths, and, like, you can see there are graphs, right? So you can see charts of, like, when it is most likely, and it is very rare to have a late stage loss, but it puts you and, of course, I would like you to reflect and tell tell us what you actually think, but it puts you in this weird place where you're between stillbirth and miscarriage. I would imagine you don't really identify with either.
Right. Yeah.
That stillbirth often
That's
is
definitely
much more, people handle that more like an infant loss,
right.
whereas
And I
miscarriage is
feel
this
like
other thing.
most yeah, so with miscarriage, and that's interesting, because we had the point of, like, when I delivered the baby, at the hospital, they're like, "Well, what do you wanna do with him?"
Mm,
And I'm like, I mean, I'm not gonna leave him here, like, discard, it was like this
mhm,
whole thing around it, like, I'm not leaving him here.
right.
Um, I mean, I am technically, like, somebody's gonna have to come get him, like, I can't like, it's not
You
like you're gonna
can't,
let me
yeah,
just,
like,
like, walk out.
right.
But, so my husband and I had to decide, like, do we do a service? Do we bury him? Do we cremate him? What do we do in this situation? And we actually disagreed on what should be done. And I kind of played the I delivered this baby, like, this is my decision card. Um, and we ended up on the same page. I don't know what his thought process was leading to it, but I was like, I felt so bad leaving him at that place because it was such a negative experience. Because I mean, delivering a baby where also it happened in July, and I don't know if you know this about hospitals, but the new batch of doctors that are just
Mm,
graduating from medical school are landing in emergency rooms at 3 o'clock in the morning in July, having had very little like practical experience. So
right.
this guy, I mean, he had to leave. The nurse had to kick him out because he was like about to throw up, as this was like he just couldn't handle what was happening. He was like
Jeez.
a baby doctor. Um, so it was just like this whole traumatic experience, and I felt like leaving him and not taking him with us was just like something I could not wrap my mind around. And my husband was like, you know, it's for us to move on and for us to heal from this. Like, what do we, I don't want to bury him at a cemetery. We move because of his job. Like, what are we going to do with this baby? So, and anyway, long story short, we had him cremated, and we originally had him interred in the cemetery where my husband was. And we were going to get a uh, like a marker inscribed there, but could never bring ourselves to do it. And when we moved away, we were like, we're gonna take him with us. And so we had the urn removed from the thing and brought him with us. And now he's like at our house with us. So yeah, it's not the same thing as a stillbirth where you're doing a burial service and where
Mhm,
you're mourning the loss of a child. Like, I recognize that it's a
mhm,
different thing, but it's also not like when you miscarry at 4, 6, 8 weeks, whatever. I feel like that's
right.
a different, you're not figuring out what to do
Yeah, that's something
with
that
this.
Brittany and I talked about, and I'll link her episode in the show notes, but we talked about when she was, because the bleeding went on for such a long time that she felt like she was constantly wondering, like, was that the baby? Was that it? Like, when did it actually happen? That there's this kind of more vague, and of course, like, one is not any easier than the other, but just the, like,
Yeah.
incompleteness of miscarriage, of not really knowing when it's over, versus having, like, a more clear, this is the baby, and
Yeah.
then
And when
how
I
do
was
you
at the
proceed?
hospital, yeah, when I was at the hospital, one of the hardest things was, I think if I had gone to an OBGYN centric hospital, um, I would not let go of the clenching in my body. Like, I was trying to hold the
Mm,
baby in because I was like,
mm,
I've heard, like, I was like, I need somebody to tell me this is over. Like,
right,
if you can tell me this is over, I'll let go. But if you can't tell me this is over, I'm not letting go. Like, I need somebody to tell me this is over. And the doctor wasn't comfortable enough with the practice to be able to
mhm,
say this is over. So
right,
like there was like a whole 2 hour period where it was like, is this over? Is this not over? Is this over? Like, is like somebody, I need somebody to tell, like, I
right,
know that it is, but I need somebody to tell me medically that there's nothing we can do.
right,
So like that finality, I can't imagine like not having that
mhm,
finality, like not knowing, like that would be like that's a different trauma. And I
Right.
think maybe for me, it would have been a more difficult one than the immediate hard, like start to process, like you
Right.
have an end moment. Um, so yeah, that was probably, that was, I think, in what was lost in going to a hospital that didn't have
Mhm.
OBGYN like, I think that was the thing that most traumatized me, was living in that, like, can I do something about this for 2 hours, like, not knowing
Mhm.
if there was anything I could be doing to change what was happening.
So then it happens. You ultimately, like, your husband came
Yeah.
around, but you ultimately made a decision of, like, this is what we're gonna do. And what you like, you walk out, they say, like, "Have a great day, bye," or what was
Yes. So they transferred me to, after I delivered the baby, I got transferred via ambulance to the OBGYN hospital.
Mhm.
But they didn't tell them at the incoming hospital that I had already lost the baby. So when I got there, they're like trying to talk me through the process. And I'm like, that ship sailed so long ago. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, that happened like 3 hours ago. It's done. They're like, oh my God, we didn't know. But like, nurse after nurse after nurse that came in didn't know what was
Oh
happening.
my
Like, it was a
god.
lack of communication. So I'm like at this MFM, like, emergency room, and like
Maternal fetal
every,
medicine. Just for the
yeah,
people listening, maternal fetal medicine. Yeah.
yeah, where they like even like when I was checking out and they were pulling my the nurse that came in to remove my IV, whose name was actually Nurse Jackie, which is hilarious to me, um, was like, "Oh, mama, why are you crying? You know, you're gonna have a baby, blah 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 blah." Like, did not know that I had lost the baby.
Oh, Jesus.
So like horrible, but like interesting side note, fast forward to like a year and a half, 2 years, whatever it is later, when I'm in the hospital after delivering Caitlin, and this nurse walks in and it's fucking Nurse
Oh my
Jackie.
god.
I delivered at the hospital that I had been
Yeah.
transferred to. And I'm like, do I tell her to get the fuck out? Like, what do I do? I want to tell her to get the fuck out, but I can't because I'm too nice. Like, what do I do? I can't look at this woman. So it was just, as a funny aside. But so yeah, I got transferred to the OBGYN hospital. They, monitored my blood loss and checked my vitals, and I spent some time with them. We talked about like physical healing and things to be on the lookout for, and then they released me, and like you go home, and it's been like, I think we started the loss, I say like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and now it's 10 o'clock in the morning the next day. And, you're being wheeled out in the wheelchair because you're not supposed to walk out of the hospital, I guess. And I'm like walking out into the world, and I'm like, here we are. So my husband went and got like all the foods that I couldn't eat while I was being seen by the doctors. He went out and got all the foods that I couldn't eat before. And like, he brought like tons of coffee, and like was just like, I don't, he's like, I don't know what to do for you, but here's like some Starbucks. And I had been a big smoker before I got pregnant the first time, and I walked outside of the hospital and like lit up a cigarette in front of the hospital and was like, fuck it, like, what am I gonna do? I just started smoking again immediately that day.
So
So,
so you like so there's all these facets, right, of who I mean, what this whole podcast is about is that, like, you're not just a person with a womb, you're also an employee, you're also a partner, you're also, a daughter and a sister and a like, all of these other roles that you have in your family of origin. How did you like, having made that announcement, how did you handle telling people, and do you think I mean, I asked Brittany the same question with the acknowledgement that, like, what you say is not gonna be the right answer for everybody, but what was really helpful and what was not helpful in the way that other people handled your loss?
So we had this extra added benefit of being a priest and the priest's wife and having just announced to half the congregation. So, and it being Sunday morning now that we are supposed to announce to the other half that we're walking away with the loss. So the other priest that was there announced to the congregation. My husband reached out to her and told her what was going on. She announced to the congregation. My husband's a very private person, which is funny because of his chosen vocation. But he did not want cards. He did not want people showing up on his doorstep. He did not want like any, he was like, I want to be walled off. Like I want to pull in the drawbridge and like
Mhm.
fortify and be together in silence during our mourning. And I was just so numb, like I just didn't have the capacity. I was a total zombie for probably 2 weeks. Like I couldn't function. I was totally non-functioning for about, no, maybe not 2 weeks, maybe zero functioning for 2 or 3 days. Like not processing, not anything, like sitting on my front porch, smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee until it was time to drink whiskey. Just
Oh
like
my god.
not even like not even interacting with anything, like just like hysterically crying on and off and like just like zero functioning. So I started getting congratulation text messages and phone calls and emails because we had just announced and not everybody had heard. And so I told a couple people, we actually lost the baby last night, if you could spread the word. And I had other people spread the word, like the people who
Mhm.
reached out like to offer belated congratulations got the short end of the stick because I
Yeah,
made them
right?
my messenger.
Ooh.
Oh my god. So
Respond promptly is the lesson here if you hear someone's pregnant.
um, so I think what worked for me, like what helped me was to not, I couldn't have contact without hysterically crying and like unloading my traumatic story on people. Um, so I think for us, like really pulling up the drawbridge and being like, keep your casseroles and everything else like on hold because
Mhm.
I can't handle that right now. I can't handle telling you what happened. I can't handle responding to a text message. I can't
Mhm.
handle speaking to you. Please don't knock on my door. It makes things worse. Like I just need to like be in a vegetative state for a while. We kept, so after a few days we would try to like go out to eat, but because my husband was a public figure in our community, it would like people would either not know and like want to like congratulate us or would know and like would sit awkwardly across the restaurant and like look at us every now and then, and we felt like we couldn't go
Mhm.
anywhere without facing it. um
Mhm.
so we had a friend who is a priest in California and Nevada who ran a summer camp at Lake Tahoe. And so we booked a flight like for the next day to Lake Tahoe and spent a week out in Lake Tahoe,
That's amazing.
and just like walked away from it. And I
Right,
was so
yeah.
thankful that financially we were in a place to do it. It was summertime and I was able to find a hotel that had a
Mhm.
room for a week that wasn't like crazy expensive. Well, it was a little bit expensive, but it wasn't like unaffordable for us at the moment. Like I mean, I just was like, what are we going to do? I got 2 weeks for bereavement off of work. Like, let's go to Tahoe. Like, let's just leave. Let's walk away from this and come back in a week.
So how
And
did
so
what did you I mean, like, I don't know if "do" is the right word because probably nothing is the answer, but what did you and your husband how did you process that? What did you do with that time?
Um, so we spent a lot of time actually in the hotel room,
Mhm.
weirdly, like just like laying around and reading books and like just kind of being in a different space.
Mhm.
We would sit outside and there was like a fire pit and some like outdoor games and a bar in the like little area of the hotel. So we would like kind of hang out there a little bit during the day. But we would go hiking,
Mhm.
and go meet up with the people that we knew. Um, I mean, it was just being in a different space because I had a
Mhm.
little bit of like, I want to say PTSD in relation to like the different places in my house that things had happened
Mm.
to. Like
Mhm.
I couldn't walk through my kitchen where my water broke without
Mm.
like losing it. And I couldn't be in my bedroom without thinking about the contractions that I was having. And maybe if I had, like when I first had him, like I laid there for about 40 minutes being like, is this going to go away or is this going to get
Mm.
worse? Like, what is it? If this gets worse, I'm going to wake him up. So like I would like lay there in the space and be like, oh, rethinking, like
Mhm.
reliving that moment. So just getting into a different physical space helped to like break that thought loop that was
Mhm.
happening. Because at first, when we came back from Tahoe, I was like, I don't know if I can live in this house anymore. Like, I'm traumatized. Like every time I walk
Mhm.
through this room, every time so I think getting out of the space, getting away from the people who like meant well and
Mhm.
wanted to help us, because church people are very helpful
Mm.
in
Mhm.
times of loss, which is excellent in general. But for this, it was like,
Everyone's needs are so different, right? Like, even
yeah,
within the same family, like, the people experiencing a loss, whatever the loss might be, like, some people will really appreciate that, and other people I'm with you, I'm like, "Don't come
yeah,
near," like, when it comes to grief, I'm like, "Don't come near me, don't help me, don't speak to me," like.
yeah. Pretend that you don't know. I went back to work after like just 2.5, 3 weeks, something like that. And the idea of people being sympathetic to me, like
Mhm.
just the thought of it, would send me into hysterical crying.
Mhm.
And I'm an attorney in a very litigation heavy area where it's like, and a woman. So like crying is not acceptable. Like it is, but it's not, you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
I've had to get past that for myself where like if I'm gonna have to cry, I'm gonna have to cry and like I don't care what you think about it. But I worked so hard to develop a reputation and
Mhm.
an ability as a very strong person. And so like walking
Mhm.
into a place knowing that I'm going to hysterically cry in front of people that I've built a reputation for myself in front of
Mhm.
was probably the most difficult part of return to normal life,
Mhm.
for me as an attorney.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you're in general, you're very warm, but you do have a strong, like, a persona that is very grounded and stable, and I can totally see how that identity of one's self, like, regardless of what other people think, like, I think everyone else would be like, "Yeah, I get it. You're allowed to cry." But
Yeah.
just to the way that you see yourself is so shaken by that shift in identity. And I want to talk a little bit about, you've used the word trauma a few times, and the way that I describe trauma to people is a negative emotion that manifests physically. That is not just, oh, this is a feeling that I have, but like this is living in the tissue of the body at like a very um nervous system, like lizard brain. It's not something that I can consciously have an awareness of. It just kind of like comes upon you. And
Yeah.
and I think that in the world that I work, where we actually deal with physical trauma often as well, that it's like, oh yeah, you tore your ACL, like you had a surgery. Those are physical traumas. And I think that the parallel between those words is like never more obvious than when it comes to childbearing and childbirth, because it is such a deeply emotional and physiological process. And you mentioned, feeling like you were like holding and like trying to physically hold the baby in. How did your body, and I'm guessing you probably only see it in hindsight, but how do you think that experience shifted the way that you relate to your body and the way that your body functioned?
So having, I don't know when I started to, I think when I said it to you just now, like I had so much tightness in my pelvic floor after Caitlin was born, and so much like lack of function. And I wonder now, like looking back, if I ever like really recovered from that 2 hour like death grip
Mm-hmm.
before I got pregnant again and before I had her. Because, you know, a lot of like the physical part of it, like my doctor and everybody else, not everybody else, my doctor really, um, was basically like, well, you were starting to show, but you weren't so far along that you should have a lot of physical effects from this.
Mm,
Like, you know, at 16 weeks, like your milk's probably not going to come in. You're probably not quite to the point where, you know, your body's going to go through a lot physically. You have to recover from, there is some trauma that happened physically. Like you're going to pass the placenta, you passed the placenta, you did all these things.
mm-hmm.
But as far as like, you're not having gone through a full term pregnancy dealing with it. So I never thought about doing pelvic floor or any of that. When I got pregnant with Caitlin, it was pretty quick in the pregnancy. I'll say by 15 or 16 weeks that I started having sciatica,
Mm,
and I started having all these like IT band problems, and I had like started like getting the pain that I didn't have the first time
mm,
really early on.
mm.
So I think that like I think there was a lot of like I didn't ever let go before I moved on with the second pregnancy.
And I have seen a correlation between a lot of the things that you're saying, and this is just my own observation. I haven't seen evidence of this in the literature, but um, with miscarriage and hip flexor issues, or just general issues around the hip and the pelvis, that I mean, trauma in humans, the way we respond to trauma is by tucking ourselves in, right? Like by literally pulling our knees to our chest and curling inward. And so all of that like hip pelvis stuff like really gets tight and crunchy, and it's, you know, subconscious. It's not like we're literally curling. I mean, maybe you are for a few weeks literally curling into a ball, but also like subconsciously you tighten and restrict and constrict down. And
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, people have incredible trauma to the pelvic floor from pushing for 2 hours. So why would the reverse not be true as well? That like holding for 2 hours would, especially if it's not then consciously released and relaxed back down again. You've also talked a little bit to me about kind of that in between time between pregnancies where you felt like you never really got back to taking care of yourself in the same way you had
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. So leading up to getting pregnant the first time, I was working out 3 or 4 days a week. I was running. I was eating well. I was, you know, because we were going to at some point in the near future get pregnant, and I was trying to like get my body ready for that. I had lost weight. I was feeling good, and then after I lost, like I just never found, like I tried to go back to the things that I was doing, the workouts that I was doing, the running and everything, and I just never just found motivation for it. I felt like I was kind of in survival mode and never, you know, like I would come home from work and like we would eat or like have a couple beers and eat and like watch TV. I watched a lot of TV and like cross stitched. I cross stitched Van Gogh's Starry Night, the entire thing. I have it. I'll show you. Van Gogh's Starry Night, the whole like 16 by like crazy. Um, so like I just couldn't, like I would try to do workouts and I just wasn't, I couldn't engage. And it, for me, working out had always been like a, oh, this feels so good. So, you know,
Mhm.
like this is what I need to do for myself. And I feel great and I want to do this. And I get up at 6 and I, you know, this is really good. And then it became like working out was like, you know, it's a little bit, it's probably depression and hormones and everything else, but it was like, why am I bothering to do this when I could just get up at 7:30 and still make it to work on time?
Mm,
Like why am I doing this? You know, what is
right.
the point of all this? And like I just changed. I never I would still make myself do some stuff, but I never lost the weight or went back to a healthy relationship with my body before I got pregnant again, I don't think.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about getting pregnant again?
Um, yeah, we ended up actually getting pregnant on the exact same conception date as we
Oh,
had, like a year removed,
wow.
weirdly. Yeah, like not intentionally at
Right.
all. Um, so I got pregnant. I went in to have it confirmed. Um, and my doctor was like over the moon, like this is going to be great. And I also was over the moon. But a weird thing happens when you like start going to doctor's appointments after when you get pregnant is they say, is this your first pregnancy? Is this your first baby? It's like, well, it's my second pregnancy, first baby. Like, how do you answer that question? And why do you keep asking me? Like, how necessary is this information for you? Does it change like the care that I'm getting? Like, please stop asking me this.
Hmm.
Um,
Brittany said the
so
exact same thing. Just
yeah,
like, what?
it's like none of your fucking business. How about that?
Yeah, like
Like,
let's
it's a very
re-traumatize
like,
everyone who's ever had a
yeah,
miscarriage, right?
yeah, it's such an insensitive, and it's definitely in the paperwork. Like every time I go, like I had to go to the emergency room, I want to say 2 or 3 times with my pregnancy with Caitlin.
Oh my goodness.
Um, and they every time you go in, and I'm like, I'm sure that it's in your paperwork. Like I called ahead to tell you I was coming. My doctor is a practices here. Like I know that like why are you asking me this question again?
Mhm.
So that was a big thing. And then when you're pregnant again after a loss, um, it doesn't seem real until you get, for me anyway, it didn't seem real until I got to the point of loss.
Mhm.
And then, so I had expected to be like a nervous wreck from like day one, but I was just like, la la la, it's not even happening almost, like
Mhm.
all the way up until like a week or two before I hit 16 weeks. And then when I hit 16 weeks, then I became a total wreck. And they put me on, I had to see the maternal fetal medicine doctor. I was high risk, not just because of age at this point, but like also because of an unexplained loss. So I had to do extra testing. I had sonograms. My doctor was great. He was like, if you want to do a sonogram every single week of your pregnancy to check on this baby, I will see you every single week. And I'm like, how's Friday for you? So we had, I had sonograms every single week. I had progesterone shots every single week from 16 to 36 weeks, which is horrible. And but the ability to go in to see the doctor every single week, to check on her every single week, to be connected like that, and to see a specialist for a little while there really helped, I think, with my mental health
Mhm.
in getting through. Um, but because they didn't know the reason for the loss, they put me on full pelvic rest from like week 14 to the end, which is like, I mean, not just like no sex, it's like no nut, like don't touch me, stay away from me. Like no, I mean, no running, no yoga,
Mhm.
no like nothing.
Yeah,
He was
full
like, we don't
pelvic
know why
rest
you
is
lost.
like you go to work and you go home. That's
Yeah.
about it.
And it was very like, he was like, I don't know why you lost this baby. You don't know why you lost this baby. If you're doing something, like say you go to a yoga class, even if it's a prenatal yoga class, and then you lose the baby, are you going to be able to forgive yourself? So
Yeah,
don't do it.
I mean, so this is something I
Like
talk
it's not
about.
correlated.
Right, this is something I talk about a lot with miscarriage is that like there's I think a lot of well-meaning instructors will say like, "Oh, if you're pregnant, you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do this because you wouldn't want anything to happen." And that's not the case. It's not that that thing is actually dangerous. It's that, okay, can you take in the fact that scientifically this is not dangerous and does not pose any additional risk? And then if something still happens that you miscarry or lose this pregnancy, will you logically be able to understand that it was not your fault, or are you going to blame yourself no matter what? Because if you're going to blame yourself no matter what, then don't do it. But if you're going to
Yeah.
be able to logically handle the fact that it wasn't your fault and you didn't do anything wrong, then go ahead and do it.
Yeah. So he was basically like, we're going to err on the side of super caution because we don't know why you had this loss. And so I couldn't like all the stuff that I wanted to do to maintain healthy physical functioning.
Yeah, it's hard to have
Like,
sciatica and not be able to, like, movement is one of the best things you can do for a lot of the issues that you mentioned, is like stretching and rolling and massage and strengthening the appropriate places. If you can't do any of those
yeah,
things, you're just like in pain constantly.
yeah. Pregnancy was horrible. At about 25 weeks, I think, I finally got him to let me go to a physical therapist. And like the compromise that was like, while I was directly supervised by a physical therapist, then I could do some movements to like, because it was like, if you're gonna hurt yourself, or do something that's, if you're being supervised and a physical therapist is telling you the thing that you're doing is okay for your body at this stage in your pregnancy, then it's easier for you to logically say, like, if you lose the
I didn't
baby
do
or
anything
something
wrong.
happens, like, I was being, I had a physical therapist who was sitting there telling me what to do.
Yeah.
So that was our kind of our compromise. I had to talk him into it.
It sounds like, honestly, what I'm hearing is like you did a very good job. You said you didn't want to kick this nurse out of your room because you were being nice, but it does sound like you did do a very good job of asking for what you needed and
Mhm.
really like pushing for yourself, aside from Nurse Jackie. But that is, I think, a really difficult thing for a lot of pregnant people, and a a skill that we have to develop in pregnancy, because
Yeah.
now you have a baby and you have to like take her to the doctor and be like, advocate for her needs and she can't speak for herself.
Yeah, my doctor really, 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 really helped with that a lot, because he was like, he's like, I've never had a baby. I'm a dude. Like, I don't know what you're going through. He's like, I've done this for a long time, but I don't know if there's something that you think that you need or something you think
Mhm,
that would help you. Like, let's talk about it. Like, I'm here
mhm.
for you. Like, what is it that you need to do? And so it took a little convincing, but I was able to get him. It really helped though when I was in the hospital having her. Um, if we could talk about a birth story for a moment.
I'm always here for the birth stories.
So uh, I thought that, so I didn't know how I was going to feel about like going into labor and how labor was going to happen, because I thought, like, what if my water breaks at 3:30 in the morning and I'm like all of a sudden back into
Mhm.
miscarriage? So I'm like, well, that's probably like the least likely thing that's going to happen. So of course my water broke at 3:30 in the morning in the same like in the same place in the house. And all I had was like calm and like excitement. And I like woke up my husband and was like, my water broke. I'm going to go take a shower. I'm going to eat something. And then we're going to go to the hospital. Like, I've called the doctor. I already let him know we're good. And he's like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah,
Did
we're
you go
doing
to
it.
40 weeks? Is that, when did this happen?
39,
Yeah.
39 weeks exactly. So we go to the hospital. My water broke, but I wasn't dilated at all. So they had to give some medication. They pushed an easier one through the IV and then the Pitocin, which was horrible.
Mhm.
I was basically in labor for 26 hours. I had an epidural at like 17 hours or something, and it failed within 20 minutes. And every single anesthesiologist was in surgery for the next 4 hours. So I was like 4 hours without an epidural. It turned out that there's a bony protrusion in my pelvis, which they found like checking my cervix, that was blocking my birth canal, but not entirely. So they still had me push for 2 hours before they decided to like do a C-section. And I had said, like, is there some reason we can't do the C-section now? Like, I don't need to be a hero. Like, I'm not one of those, like, if it's not vaginal, it's not real. Like, let's go, like, I'll do a C-section unless you think there's like a medical reason why vaginal birth is better. And they're like, the C-section's available to you at any time. Just push for 2 hours first. And I'm like, but I would really like to. And I did not advocate for myself well enough in that moment, because I felt like they were telling me there was something wrong with having a C-section. And so what I would say for anybody who like has the slightest, like maybe something could go wrong with vaginal birth, we're suggesting that like you don't just get a C-section, like it's fine. Like I wish that I had done it, like I wish I had scheduled it, like
Yeah. I should probably do a whole episode about C-section versus vaginal birth. There's a couple really important things here. One is that you knew before you had her that Caitlin was your only kid.
Yeah.
And the biggest risk with C-sections is when you have two or more, like three or more, so more than two. Each subsequent C-section becomes higher and higher risk, and there's like kind of a cliff at like 2. If you go beyond that, that's where it really starts to get high risk. So often on a first birth, providers are more reticent to have a C-section if it's not absolutely like life and death, because it not great long term if you're going to have multiple kids. That's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing is theoretically, a surgical birth is more difficult to recover from, but that depends what you're comparing it to. So
the prior 4 months had been so fucking miserable. Like having her was such a physical relief on my body that like I was up within hours after my C-section walking like the nurse's station, and they're just like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, this is the best I have felt in 4 months. This is amazing. Why didn't we just do this? Like I feel so good.
Right. So when like there is potential trauma that can happen to your pelvic floor and abdominal tissues from pushing, right? So if you're like not having productive labor, then sometimes, yes, a C-section is less traumatizing, but also like there's pros and cons to both, right? People also have to acknowledge that it is an abdominal surgery that like does require recovery. And we've talked through your recovery about like scar massage and pelvic floor recovery, and like having you would think cutting through your abs would not affect your vagina. It does, which is, and your bladder, like you still have those issues. So it's not like a get out of jail free card. Might be better than a really traumatic vaginal birth, but it's not better than a trauma-free vaginal birth. Like, yeah, I don't know what to call that, because there is no such thing as like a normal birth, but a less damaging vaginal birth.
Yeah.
So I love that, like, depending on the person, depending on the situation, like you're the only person who's qualified to decide whether you want a C-section. Like you are the only one. No one else is like the medical providers can offer suggestions, they can offer reasons, they can give you risks and benefits, but ultimately they can't decide for you if that's the right choice.
Yeah. And like it wasn't, God, and so the thing, I think one of the reasons I had this nurse that was not Nurse Jackie, but one of the reasons that I ended up pushing as long as I did instead of just being like, let's just do the C-section, is because I had this very militant nurse who I would have normally appreciated. Like in the back of my mind, like they gave me 3 options of what could happen, like with this bony protrusion. Like the first one was that like it's not going to affect anything. The second one was then that she would just be able to come through. The second one was that maybe her head could come through, but then her shoulders would get stuck and she could dislocate a shoulder. Mm-hmm. And then the third one was that like her head wouldn't even go through, whatever, mm-hmm. It just wouldn't work out. And then we'd end up having to have the C-section either way. And I'm like, if shoulder dislocation is an available option for something that's going to happen to my child, I would like to have a C-section.
Right.
Like, what are the chances of this option? But when you've already been in labor for like 22 hours and you've had a failed epidural and you're like, all these things are going on and it's just like miserable. and they're like telling you to make a decision now, then you
Mhm.
have this nurse that walks in and is like, we're
You
gonna
can
push,
yeah.
not on my watch, let's do it. Which normally I like tough love. I live in
Mhm.
New York, like tough love is my thing. But like when you're really wondering about like, if I push as hard as I can, am I going to hurt my child?
Which could very like, once you've introduced that possibility, that's in your head, and it's possible that the bony protrusion didn't do anything to stop her birth, and just the thought of it is what stopped
Yeah.
her, like, being able to progress, is that, and I talk about this often, like, you probably had a predisposition because of the previous trauma, you probably had a predisposition to the pelvic floor not wanting to open and to allow her to pass through anyway. But then once, like, I always say, I'm like, once you think it, it's true. Like, it doesn't matter if
Yeah.
it's true or not. Once you've had the thought, oh my God, like, pushing could put her in a very dangerous position, then it's true. It doesn't matter if it was true in the first place. Now it is,
Yeah.
because now you think it. So
Yeah.
let's really quickly, because we are running out of time. What I know you you thought about making notes. So I know you at least have the version, the like, I was in the shower and thinking about it ahead of time. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you really would want people to hear?
Yeah. So I had her, and then 3 or 4 days later, was getting released. I lost a lot of blood, but they offered me a transfusion, and I said no because the way that I interpreted what they were saying was not about like blood loss and pallets, and it was because I was anemic, like slightly anemic was what I was thinking they meant, and it isn't. That's not what was happening. But so I turned down the transfusion, which turned out to be a good thing. I went home New Year's Eve, feeling like I just had a baby in like the most traumatic way possible. And then woke up on New Year's Day, unable to breathe, laying down, um, and was like, something is off. We need to go back to the hospital. Something's wrong. So I called the doctor on call and said, when I lay down, I'm having a hard time breathing. When I sit up, I'm fine. And he's like, you need to come back in. And I'm like, well, we have been awake. My baby went to sleep probably 45 minutes ago. um, my husband is like dead to the world. Can I let him sleep for a couple of hours before we come back in? I probably needed to get the transfusion, like not even thinking that it was anything serious. Like maybe I should have done the transfusion. I feel shitty. So we go in. It turns out that I had postpartum preeclampsia, and I was
Oh,
hospitalized for 4 more days. And fun fact, once they release the baby from the hospital, the baby's no longer a patient. So if you have to go back, you don't have the same options
oh,
for
they're a
being able.
visitor. They're
Yeah,
not.
she's a
Yeah.
visitor. And she can't stay with you unless there's another adult there, because if you have to be pulled out of the room for something, then there's nobody to watch the baby and she's not a patient there anymore. Um,
Yikes.
so the most important thing I would say is, if there's any questions about your blood pressure, if you're having any headaches while you're postpartum in the hospital still, if there are any questions about like your blood levels and like, well, we'll release you and see how it's going, don't go.
Mhm.
Like, I want to stay and resolve this. I know everybody wants to get out of the hospital. Everybody wants to go home and like start their life with their baby.
Mhm.
Do not go until everything is normal, because once you go, that you if you have to come back, it becomes like a whole, who's staying with the baby, who's going to be in the hospital with
Mhm.
you. And
More
I
so now, I would assume, with COVID
Yeah.
precautions, that people can't, a lot of hospitals are not on normal visitor
Yeah, so
situations.
like, can your baby, like with COVID, like I don't even know if she would have been able to stay with me. And for like the first day and a half that I was back in the hospital, I legitimately thought I was dying. The magnesium drip that they do to address the postpartum preeclampsia, because the cure for preeclampsia is having a baby.
Right.
But if you've had a baby, then there's no cure. Like, what do you do? So
Yeah.
you get this magnesium drip that, I mean, it wrecks you physically. And it's postpartum preeclampsia is not a normal thing that doctors deal with a lot. So there's also like they didn't have a place for me. Like, do you go to the
Mhm.
postpartum unit? Are you on the antepartum unit? Are you like, where are you? Where do you go? Um, so that was the last thing that we didn't talk about, that it just, if there's any question as to whether you're fully recovered before you go, and it didn't kick in until 4 days after she was born, like really kick in. My lung was partially collapsed. Like it was a whole like horrible thing. So one time only, Caitlin's it. We're good.
And she's
Stand
and
by that
she's
decision.
wonderful. She's all you need.
Yeah.
All right. I am so grateful to you, Holly, for sharing your story. And I think that there's a lot of lessons for people here. I mean, just the awareness. And I said this in the episode with Brittany as well, that like, I think I love the quote, worry is the work of pregnant women. Of just there's some, at least for me, some sense of safety and reassurance in just knowing what can go wrong, so
Mhm.
that you have, kind of a way of navigating or understanding where you are in relation to risk, because pretending there is none doesn't help. It
Yeah.
makes, it makes whatever can go wrong more traumatizing and more painful. Um, so if it is helpful to you, listener, to be aware of what the risks are, then yeah, go look up those charts of like when loss can happen, and just kind of understand where you're at in relation to that risk, if it's helpful for you. And if it's not helpful for you, don't do that shit. Um, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you, Holly. I feel like we could do this for infinity, but it's so much here for people to enjoy, and I really, really appreciate your time and your vulnerability.
No problem.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You too.